At my husband's funeral, my son Daniel stood at the podium with a trembling voice and thanked another woman. "She was the one who was truly family to us," he said. At that moment, all eyes in the room turned to the woman in the front row, the one in the fitted dress and perfect makeup, with delicate tears resting in her eyes. And me, the real wife, the mother. I sat off to the side, unnoticed, invisible. When the lawyer later informed me that my husband had left everything to her, not a single dime for me, Linda McAllister embraced my son and smiled a triumphant smile, as if she had already won. But then I pulled out the second will, and just like that, there was no one in the room smiling anymore. I never imagined my life would begin anew at a funeral. Robert died in a sudden car accident. He was driving downtown that morning in a heavy rain. They said the brakes failed on a curve and the car crashed into a supermarket. He was gone quick. The doctor said he didn't suffer, but I wasn't sure he deserved such a clean departure. We had been married for 40 years. I used to think our marriage, while not romantic, was at least solid. Like one of those old houses weathered by storms, worn on the outside, but still standing. I gave up my career to tend to every corner of our home. He always said, "I can take care of you. You don't need to work." And I believed him. I naively thought it was some kind of love. At the memorial, I wore his favorite charcoal gray wool coat and stood by the chapel entrance greeting guests. The wind whipped, my fingers were numb. Still, I smiled, doing my best to make sure his farewell was dignified and orderly. Robert cared so much about appearances, about what other people thought of him. Even in his death, I found myself maintaining that neat facade for him. Daniel was at the podium. He's our only child. He turns 33 this year and is a back-end engineer for a tech company. He wore a sharp, dark suit. His face was solemn, and his voice was as steady as always. After reading a tribute to his father, he paused, and his eyes reddened. "There's someone I want to give a special thank you to," Daniel said, his voice a little shaky. The room fell silent. I clutched my handbag in my lap, my knuckles turning white. I thought he was about to say, "My mother." In that moment, I could almost hear it forming in his throat, that long-awaited acknowledgement. 40 years of companionship, dedication to the home, nights spent at the hospital, all the quiet sacrifices. I truly believed he had finally seen me. But what came next sliced through me like a dull blade, stripping that hope away inch by inch. Someone who supported my father through the toughest time of his life, Ms. Linda McAllister. A soft murmur went down the aisle. From the front row, a woman stood up and dabbed her eyes, nodding politely. She wore a deep emerald green wool coat, black heels, flawless makeup, and perfectly coiffed hair. As she sat down, those around her turned to look, curious and surprised. I felt sound explode in my ears like a detonated silence. Linda McAllister. I knew the name. She was Robert's administrative assistant at the firm. He later promoted her to a consulting partner, even briefly including her on the board. When I'd ask about her, he'd always downplay it. "She's competent. Don't be paranoid." I remembered that year's company party. She brought me wine, smiling sweetly, moving with the ease of a woman who fit in. I dismissed her at the time as just another sycophantic employee. Looking back now, how ironic. From across the room, someone whispered, "She's sitting so close, like she's family." And my son had just thanked that woman at his father's funeral. I felt like the chair had dropped from under me. My ears were ringing, and the world vibrated faintly. People came up to shake my hand, murmuring the usual. "He was a good man. We'll miss him." I nodded automatically, like a machine repeating pre-programmed responses. I had planned to hold on until the end, to maintain appearances. But then I heard Daniel whisper to Linda, "You're the one who's truly family." I nearly dropped the teacup in my hand. In that moment, I realized this funeral wasn't for Robert. It was for a hidden world I didn't know existed, and I was just a stranger, a discarded observer. That night, back home, I sat in the empty living room. As I took off the coat, I saw that the satin ribbon was wrinkled, as if the last vestige of my marriage's dignity had been accidentally snapped. I sat at the dining room table and stared at the row of empty chairs. Robert's seat was still in its place. I hadn't moved it. For decades, he'd always sat there, hand on the armrest, waiting for me to bring him his soup. Now it was just alone, and the armrest had gone cold. There were still bottles of his favorite beer in the fridge. I never liked the brand, it was too bitter, but he'd buy a six-pack every week, just for him. Turns out, habit is the cruelest prison. I didn't sleep that night. I pulled out some old photo albums. In the photos, we were still young. There was light in his eyes. I smiled easily back then. I even found an old employee ID from when I was a financial consultant at his firm. Short hair, self-assured, always seated second from the right at every board meeting. Then he told me, "You should quit. I'll take care of everything." And I, foolishly, listened. I closed the album and poured myself a glass of water. The kitchen clock ticked. I realized all the pride, all the patience I had once poured into keeping our marriage intact had been buried the moment he died. What I didn't know, however, was that beneath all this was a deeper betrayal. The next morning, every word I heard in the lawyer's office felt like a line from a life script I was never invited to read. The air smelled faintly of ink and old wood cabinets. A faded print of the Constitution hung crooked on the wall, and sunlight filtered through the blinds, slicing the floor into narrow strips of light. It was the law firm Robert had designated before his death. The lead lawyer was a man in his 50s with a slow, heavy voice. Every syllable was drawn out as if to underscore something unsaid. "Pursuant to the will signed by Mr. Robert De Smith 3 years ago," he began with mechanical calm, "the majority of his assets, including the main residence in Summerball, the vacation property in Nantucket, and the remaining balance of his personal accounts, shall be inherited by Ms. Linda McAllister." I wasn't just stunned. I felt like I'd been pushed off the main stage of my own life, left standing behind the curtain in a dead spotlight, unsure if I had ever truly played the part I thought was mine. I turned to look at Daniel. He sat ramrod straight, his gaze fixed forward, as if he were listening to a quarterly financial report. His fingers were perfectly interlocked. Not a hint of surprise, not a shift in his expression, as if he had known all along. When the reading was over, I stood up and walked over to him. "You knew," I said in a low, trembling voice. "Didn't you?" He looked at me with a strangely serene tone. "Dad had his reasons." "His reasons," I whispered, the words choked in my throat. What did 40 years of marriage mean to him? Daniel was silent for a moment, then said, "He worked hard his whole life. Linda was there for him. She understood him." He lowered his voice almost apologetically. "You didn't." In that moment, I saw it clearly. Not only had I lost my husband, I was losing my son. He wasn't defending his father's memory. He was redrawing the family tree and erasing me from the map. When I got home, I stood in the driveway for what felt like an eternity, the weight of my handbag numbing my arm. I went into the bedroom and opened Robert's closet. His shirts, ties, and wool vests were still perfectly arranged with that familiar scent of refined decorum. But what lies were woven into those fibers? When did he decide I was no longer family? Was it the year I forgot to buy his favorite wine for our anniversary? Or before that, when I quit my job as his financial consultant and just became a housewife? I started searching through the drawers for proof I wasn't crazy. Old ledgers, photos, receipts, old business cards. In the kitchen drawer, I found a folder of letters Robert had kept. One was from the Nantucket Property Management Company. The date was 6 years ago. The recipient, Linda. My hands were shaking. I had been to that house by the sea countless times, not realizing I was just a guest. That afternoon, I walked across the street to visit Giselle, our longtime neighbor. She was a widow in her late 70s, with a sharp memory and a garden brimming with roses. When I mentioned Linda's name, her face stiffened. "Linda, wasn't she the one Robert would take to those symphonies?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "You didn't go with them?" I forced a smile. My mouth was dry. I never really liked social events much. Giselle shifted in her seat. "Oh, I always thought they were an item. She's been on this street several times. One year she helped Robert put up the Christmas lights." I froze. That Christmas, I was stuck upstairs with a swollen knee. Robert had told me a neighborhood boy had helped him. "Do you remember when they started getting close?" I asked. Giselle stirred her tea, thinking, "At least 10, maybe 15 years ago. I remember seeing her around here when you were away taking care of your sister. I thought she was some cousin or something." 15 years. I sat in Giselle's sunroom feeling like a stranger who had walked into the wrong house. All these years, I had managed our retirement budget down to the last penny. I had chosen his bathrobes, scheduled his physicals, and even dipped into my parents' last savings to rescue his company during a cash crisis. And he had been building golden bricks for another woman's future out of my sight, out of my reach. Returning home, I finally found an old cardboard box in the basement filled with photos. There was Robert standing next to Linda at a company event. His hand rested gently on her arm, smiling a radiant smile like never before. He looked relaxed, younger, happier than he ever looked beside me. And in one photo, there was Daniel, barely 18 or 19, standing with them. His smile was nervous but not reluctant. One corner of the photo was marked out. I rubbed it gently with an eraser and uncovered a line written in pen. "Our little family will be official one day." I could almost hear something break in my chest. It wasn't a heart, it wasn't glass, it was something deeper, something called trust, and it would never be whole again. That night, I lit a single candle in the kitchen, and, for the first time in this house without Robert, I put on music, a slow, soft, unhurried jazz record. I started to wonder. Maybe I'd lived my whole life to his rhythm and never danced to my own. But not anymore. From now on, the music, the beat, the dance steps, it's all mine to choose. I thought the worst was over. The will, the truth about the properties. Linda, taking her place at the center of it all, brazenly labeled as family. That was enough humiliation for a lifetime. But I hadn't realized that what would truly break my heart was Daniel. He is my only child. I had believed that however unrecognizable the rest of the world became, he would still be mine. We agreed to meet at the town cafe, the one where he used to get caramel dessert as a little boy. He showed up in a trench coat, his demeanor stiff and formal, as if he were preparing for an interview, not to meet his mother. Before I could sit down, he placed his phone face down on the table. He always did that, a subtle signal that any buzz could be a reason to abandon the conversation. "Why did you send Linda a legal notice?" he asked bluntly. I took a deep breath and looked him in the eyes. "Do you think I shouldn't have?" He shrugged. "She didn't hurt you. Dad gave her the money. It was his decision. Suing her just makes everyone uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable?" I said, my voice cracking with disbelief. "Daniel, your father deceived me for decades. I gave up my career for this family, my friends for you. I even sold my mother's emerald ring just to pay your college tuition. Do you know what that ring meant to me?" Daniel frowned, exhaling with visible irritation. "You always bring it up, like I owe you something." That hit me like a dull blow to the chest. It wasn't anger, not even an argument, just distance, a cold and definitive distance. "Dad told me," Daniel said after a pause, his voice dropping, "that the happiest years of his life were with Linda. She understood him. She respected him. She didn't always question and criticize him like you did." "I questioned him because he stopped respecting me," I said, gritting my teeth. "I criticized him because he was wrong." Daniel shook his head as if he were listening to a meaningless sermon. "You're too traditional, Mom. You've always believed that making sacrifices is a virtue, but Dad didn't need that kind of love." That's when I understood. It wasn't a sudden revelation for him. He had been thinking this way for a long time. He just hadn't said it until now. I looked at him for a moment. All I could see was the boy he used to be. The boy who breathed raggedly during asthma attacks while I sat by his bed all night. the teenager who was bullied in school, whose dignity I defended as if it were my own, the 17-year-old whose heart was broken for the first time, and who curled up next to me on the backyard bench in silence until the stars came out. Did he remember any of that? I reached into my purse and pulled out an old, faded photograph. "That summer when you were 2, we went to the beach," I said, sliding the photo across the table. "Your father backed out at the last minute for work, so it was just the 2 of us." In the photo, he's wearing bright red swim trunks and standing on wet sand with a trail of tiny, wobbly footprints behind him. "You were terrified of the waves. You'd hold onto my neck and just scream, 'Mommy, Mommy!' You didn't know much about the world back then, but you knew where safety was." Daniel looked down and said nothing. "I know you idolize your father," I continued. "He was always elegantly turned out, never raised his voice, always said the right thing. But did you ever think that maybe I set the foundation for that elegant man to exist?" He looked up. There were no tears, no remorse, just a flicker of hesitation. "Dad did what made him happy," Linda said. "She made him feel needed. You were just too strong." Too strong. That was what I was. I thought about those nights spent balancing overdue accounts, the afternoons I cooked with a fever, the years I held back tears at Robert's cold silences and kept smiling anyway. That's what he meant by too strong. I put the photo back in my wallet and stood up. My voice sounded calm, but it had a deep firmness. "You're right. I was too strong, and starting today, I'll save that strength for myself." Whatever he said after that, I didn't hear it. I walked out the cafe door into the parking lot. It had started to rain. The drops hit the windshield with a slow, relentless rhythm, an orchestra made entirely of silence. I slid into the driver's seat and wrapped my hands around the steering wheel, pausing for a long moment. I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I just sat there, realizing that what I had lost wasn't just a husband. I had lost my marriage, my family, even my son. But in that same breath, I understood something else. I could no longer wait for someone else to tell me who I was. It was time to live for myself. At first, I thought Linda was just a late-life accident in Robert's story, a calculated opportunist, a woman who slipped in through the cracks. But now I see things clearly. She was never an accident. She had planned everything. On a rainy afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee in my hands, looking at her public Facebook profile. Her profile picture showed her on the beach, smiling softly, the background edited with a tasteful blur, as if she didn't want anyone to see what was truly behind her. Her bio said, "Consultant in the architecture sector, lover of classical music and community service, grateful for life's tender company." I clicked on her photo albums. The first image, Robert was seated in a wicker chair holding a slice of lemon pie she had apparently made for him. The text said, "His smile is my favorite reward." The date stamp said it was 6 years ago, the same year I was bedridden with arthritis. Robert had told me then that work was overwhelming and he would be traveling a lot. I believed him. I thought he was simply evading the burden of caring for someone, but now I knew. He wasn't escaping me. He was living somewhere else without me. I scrolled down and found more images both familiar and strange at once. There was Robert standing in Linda's living room in the wool jacket I had given him. There he was, helping her plant flowers and arrange bonsais in her garden. And then a video came up. Robert was toasting her with a Christmas song playing softly in the background. Daniel was there. I froze. My hand hovered over the touchpad. Daniel, who was still in college at the time, had slightly longer hair and a shy, boyish face. Linda had her arm around his shoulder and said, laughing, "Your dad should be proud of you." That's when I understood. Linda was never just Robert's secret. She had been positioning herself for years as part of our family. And I was the woman she planned to displace. I called Ruth. Ruth Lanier had been a close colleague during my years at Robert's firm, one of the few women I had kept in touch with after I left the job. She was semi-retired now, helping her daughter raise a grandchild, and taking on the occasional freelance financial case. She answered on the second ring with the same energy she always had. "Maggie, my goodness, I heard about Robert. I've been meaning to call you." "Thank you," I said. I didn't stall. "Ruth, I need you to help me find something." She didn't hesitate. "Tell me what you suspect." I paused. My voice sounded calm, but it was firm. "I believe Robert used company funds, for at least the last decade, to buy properties for Linda, and there might be other unaccounted-for transfers." Ruth went quiet. "You're not just fixing a marriage, Maggie. You're looking to expose fraud." "I want the truth," I said. "I've spent too long in the dark." We agreed to meet at her house in 2 days. In the meantime, I became a woman on a mission. I went to the local library and looked up Linda's property records in Summerball. One house, a single-family villa under her name. Purchase date, 5 years ago. Right at the tail end of the company's employee housing benefits project, the same one Robert was overseeing. I had visited there during that project. I remember joking at the time, "On the next trip you take me too." He dodged the suggestion. "You wouldn't like it there." Now I knew. The room was not reserved for clients. It was for her. 2 days later, I drove to Ruth's house. Her home was in a quiet suburb, a pale gray bungalow with a row of withering chrysanthemums out front. She greeted me with a glass of lemon tea and opened her laptop. "I checked some archived payment records," she said, scrolling through 3 entries labeled "Outside Consulting Support." "But the beneficiary company is a shell. No physical office is listed." She zoomed in on one line. $50,000 paid the same month you were home recovering from surgery. My stomach twisted. Ruth looked at me with concern from behind her glasses. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? Most people would just prefer to let it go." I didn't answer. I just saved a screenshot of the file to my flash drive. On the drive home, I went slow. The sun hit the windshield hard, and the air smelled of early autumn. The radio played an old 60s ballad. The chorus repeated softly, "You only find the truth when you stop pretending." Yes, only when you stop pretending do you begin to see clearly. Back at home, I sat in front of the computer and saved Linda's Facebook photos to a new folder. I named it Evidence. I was no longer the woman who buried her emotions behind a stove. I was Maggie Smith, the legal wife of Robert, the mother of Daniel, the one who had been edited out of her own life story, and the woman who was about to rewrite the ending. The second batch of documents from Ruth arrived just as I was wiping down the kitchen sink. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting clean stripes across the countertop. I paused for a second, with a rag in my hand, and thought that was how my marriage had been maintained. Tidy, silent, until the kitchen no longer felt like mine. The email subject was simple. 3 suspicious transactions. Key, preliminary legal feasibility assessment. I opened it. A few familiar PDF statements filled the screen. Ruth had annotated them. The company name, Quinte Consulting LLC. The account tied to Linda. The transfers, 3 payments totaling over $350,000, carefully staggered over 5 years. Each one timed just outside the company's official audit cycles. She added a note. This sum lacks sufficient justification. Unless invoices for services of equivalent value can be produced, this is potentially a fraudulent gift. There it was. The proof. I felt a knot of resolve form in my chest. I knew what to do. That afternoon, I called a lawyer who specialized in fraud and corporate law. "I have a whole host of questions," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I believe my late husband systematically plundered his company to aid his longtime mistress." The lawyer was a woman named Michelle Robinson. She was in her mid-50s, and her voice on the phone was warm and no nonsense. She listened calmly as I talked. "You need to send me everything you have," she said. "Every document, every email, every photo." I hung up and started copying the files. When I was finished, I had over 50 documents. I printed everything out, arranged it neatly in a folder, and took it to her downtown law office. Her firm was in a glass skyscraper, and I took in the view of the Chicago skyline as I waited. When she walked in, she had a kind, professional smile. She had a sharp haircut that framed her chin and wore a perfectly fitted suit. She took the folder, flipped through it, and nodded. "We will go through this," she said. "I'll be in touch." "Thank you," I said, looking at her. "She betrayed me, and my son helped her. I want her to pay back every last cent." Michelle pushed her glasses higher on her nose. "We will do our best." The next few months were a whirlwind of appointments, emails, and legal proceedings. We filed a lawsuit against Linda McAllister, and the case made waves. Robert's former firm, his lawyer, and even his estate became entangled in the case. Then there was Daniel. He took Linda's side. He was outraged. "You're destroying his memory," he said to me on the phone. "Daniel, your memory of your father is a fairy tale," I said. "He was a con man who used money to betray me, his wife, and his son's mother. That's the truth." He hung up. I waited for him to call back. But he didn't. It hurt, but I did it anyway. I had to. The case went to court. Linda and her lawyer tried to paint it as a misunderstanding. They claimed the funds were legitimate payments for consulting services. They produced fake invoices that Robert had given her. But we had Ruth's evidence, and we had Robert's Facebook photos. I took the stand and told what happened. I talked about the 40 years of our marriage, about the sacrifices I made for him and Daniel, and about the pain I felt when I learned the truth. The judge, a black woman in her mid-60s, looked at me with understanding. I think she understood what goes on in the hearts of women like me. In the end, the judge ruled in our favor. She ordered Linda to pay back everything Robert had given her, including interest. The total sum was over $1 million. Linda had to sell the properties she had bought with the stolen money. She was broke. She lost her job and her reputation. I never saw her again. As for Daniel, he didn't speak to me for years. Then, when my father died, he called me. We met at the funeral and embraced. We began seeing each other again. I told him the whole story, and he started to understand. It took years, but we mended our relationship. He apologized to me. He said he was only defending an illusion the whole time. I hugged him and told him that I had believed in him the whole time. And in that moment, there were tears in many eyes. Daniel walked over and hugged me softly. "Mom," he said, smiling, "when did you get so good at giving speeches?" I smiled back. "I always was. You just weren't listening." We both laughed. Everyone laughed. Before the party was over, I took a short walk in the garden. I stopped in front of the crabapple tree I had planted 20 years ago. "Last year this thing almost died," I said. "I almost cut it down, but this spring it bloomed earlier than ever and it's still blooming." The women chuckled. I added, "Even she knew what is still alive should not be given up on." That night, when everyone had left, I folded up the chairs and put them away in the shed. The porch wind chime tinkled softly in the breeze. I turned to watch the sunset. It rested above the old maple tree at the end of the street, as if to say, "Who are you, really?" I took off my heels, walked barefoot into the house, hung up the dress, and went to bed. I knew who I was. I was a survivor, a fighter, and the truth had set me free.